It was supposed to be a routine traffic stop, a dusty old sedan, expired tags, nothing out of the ordinary for Officer Daniel Brooks, a 15-year veteran of the force. But the second he approached the driver's window, something felt off. The young man inside was visibly trembling, his eyes darting between the mirror and the back seat. And in that moment, one quiet glance past the driver's shoulder, Daniel saw something that made his breath catch. A child. Motionless. Silent. Watching. What began as a minor traffic violation was about to unravel into a story that would leave an entire town speechless and change lives forever. Officer Daniel Brooks had pulled over more cars than he could count. Broken tail lights, speeding tickets, expired plates. Every shift brought another routine stop. But the moment he stepped out of his cruiser and approached the old dented sedan parked on the shoulder, something didn't sit right. The car looked tired, coated in dust as if it had traveled too far without rest. As he neared the driver's window, he noticed the man inside was unusually tense, maybe 20 years old, pale and thin with nervous eyes that refused to settle. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. When he spoke, his voice cracked, not with defiance, but with fear. He stammered through his words, struggling to find his license, apologizing repeatedly without being asked. It wasn't the kind of panic Daniel saw from someone hiding a crime. It was something else, something deeper. As Daniel continued speaking to the young man, he caught a glimpse through the back window. He paused. In the shadows of the back seat, almost blending into the gloom, sat a child. A little girl, no older than 6, curled up with a tattered blanket pressed against her chest. Her face was calm, too calm. She didn't cry. She didn't look away. Her eyes stayed locked forward, distant and hollow, as though she'd learned to disappear without moving. Daniel couldn't remember the last time he'd seen a child look like that. It made his breath catch for a moment. He looked back at the driver. The young man, Caleb, according to the ID, seemed to brace himself, as if he knew what question was coming next. But Daniel didn't ask right away. There was something about the way Caleb sat there, shoulders hunched not in aggression but in exhaustion, that made him hesitate. He had no outstanding warrants, no sign of weapons, no aggressive behavior, and yet the silence between them felt heavier than usual. Daniel didn't know the full story, but he could tell this wasn't just a traffic stop. The girl's eyes told him that. So did Caleb's trembling hands. Something was unfolding, something delicate, and for the first time, in a long time, Daniel knew this wasn't a situation to rush. The young man struggled to meet the officer's eyes. His voice was soft, fragile, like he was trying not to break in front of someone. When asked about the little girl in the back seat, he swallowed hard and said, "She's my sister, Lily. Please don't take her from me." There was no anger in his tone, no sign of defiance, just fear. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to explain. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't running from the law in the way people usually imagine. He was running from a system that threatened to tear them apart. 6 months earlier, their mother had overdosed in the apartment they shared. There was no father in the picture, no close relatives who stepped forward to help. Lily, just 6 years old, was set to be placed in foster care. Caleb, barely out of high school himself, couldn't bear the thought of them being separated. So he made a decision. He packed what little they had, wrapped Lily in her favorite blanket, and disappeared. He'd been working odd jobs under the table, sleeping in the car most nights, driving from town to town hoping to avoid notice. Sometimes churches helped. Sometimes strangers gave him food or gas, but mostly it was just the two of them, living in the quiet margins of society, trying to stay invisible. He didn't have a plan beyond keeping her safe. He knew what the law said. He knew they would call it kidnapping or abandonment, or worse. But to him, it was the only choice that made sense. Lily was his whole world. She was the one person left who still looked at him like he mattered. Losing her would have meant losing everything. Despite the dirt under his nails and the exhaustion in his eyes, there was a strange calm in his words. He wasn't asking for pity. He was simply telling the truth, hoping someone would understand. He hadn't harmed her. He hadn't hidden her away out of selfishness. He had loved her the only way he knew how, with whatever strength he had left. And in the stillness of that moment, it became painfully clear. This wasn't a boy on the run. This was a brother keeping a promise. Caleb had held it together for as long as he could. The pressure of pretending everything was fine, of surviving. Each day on scraps and borrowed time had worn him thin. When the questions finally came, he didn't resist. He opened up, not to justify himself, but because there was nothing left to hide. He explained how he and Lily had been moving from parking lot to parking lot, sleeping in the car under blankets meant for warmth, but never quite enough. He'd been taking odd jobs, anything that paid in cash, washing dishes, sweeping sidewalks, fixing things he didn't really know how to fix. Every penny went to gas, food, or things Lily needed. He hadn't been living. He'd been holding on. He said he never wanted to run, but he didn't know what else to do. When their mother died, everything happened fast. Social workers came, paperwork followed. Caleb heard the words temporary placement and foster care, and something inside him snapped. He knew how the system worked. He'd seen it chew up kids and scatter siblings like broken pieces. He wasn't going to let that happen to Lily. She was all he had left. She was just 6, still asking where their mom had gone, still carrying a stuffed rabbit that didn't have ears anymore. He couldn't imagine her waking up in a strange house with strangers she didn't trust. So he made a promise. He told her they'd stay together. No matter what. There was no plan beyond that. Promise, no roadmap. Just hope, and the determination of someone who had lost everything but refused to let go of the one thing that still gave him purpose. He didn't ask for help because he didn't think he deserved it. All he wanted was time, to figure it out, to keep her safe, to stay by her side just a little longer. He wasn't trying to break the law. He was trying to break the cycle. And in that quiet, raw honesty, his words carried more weight than any explanation ever could. He wasn't a criminal. He was a brother. A scared, stubborn, fiercely loyal brother doing the only thing he knew how to do, protect his sister at all costs. Daniel had spent most of his career following rules, written ones, spoken ones, and the invisible ones that came with the badge. But that night, standing at the edge of what protocol demanded and what compassion called for, he found himself at a crossroads. He had every reason to make the arrest. The license was expired, the tags weren't valid, and technically Caleb had taken a minor across state lines without proper guardianship. Yet none of that felt right when he looked at Lily. She wasn't in danger. She wasn't neglected. She was loved, desperately, fiercely, in a way that broke every stereotype Daniel had seen in cases like this. What he saw wasn't a runaway and a hostage. It was a brother holding the world together for a little girl who'd already lost too much. The decision didn't come with a speech. It came in a quiet shift inside him, a subtle turning of judgment into understanding. Instead of calling dispatch to report a detainment, Daniel pulled out his personal phone and dialed an old friend, an attorney who specialized in family law. He didn't explain everything, just enough to let her know this wasn't about lawbreaking. It was about doing what was right for a child. Then he drove to a small roadside motel and paid for a room out of his own pocket. He gave Caleb the receipt, a list of legal contacts, and his own number. Not as a warning, but as an offer. Help, if they needed it. A door, not a wall. It wasn't the kind of decision that came with applause. In fact, it could have cost him everything. But Daniel didn't feel reckless. He felt human. Rules matter, he knew that. But so does mercy. And in the balance between duty and decency, he chose to lean toward compassion. Not because it was easier, but because he knew that sometimes law alone isn't enough to keep a family together. That night, the badge didn't define the choice. The child did. And in her silent, watchful gaze, he found the clarity he needed. Not every right decision makes noise. Some of them speak in silence and stay with you forever. By morning, the story had started to move, quietly at first, like a ripple through calm water. A local reporter heard about the traffic stop and the officer who chose compassion over protocol. The article didn't exaggerate or sensationalize. It simply told the truth. A young man trying to protect his little sister, and a police officer who saw the humanity in both of them. The town responded faster than anyone expected. Strangers showed up at the motel with grocery bags, warm meals, and clothes that actually fit. Someone paid for another week's stay without leaving their name. A local mechanic offered Caleb a part-time job, and a retired couple, empty nesters with space to share, offered them a room in their home. What could have ended in separation began to transform into something no one could have planned. A new beginning. Support came not just from the community, but from inside the police department itself. Instead of facing disciplinary action, Officer Daniel Brooks received quiet praise from his colleagues and a statement of support from the chief, calling his actions an act of honorable judgment in an imperfect world. It wasn't about ignoring the law. It was about recognizing when the law needed to make room for love. Caleb, with help from a volunteer attorney, began the legal process of securing guardianship of Lily. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like he was running. He felt like he was building something. Lily adjusted quickly, like kids often do when given warmth and stability. She started sleeping through the night, laughing at cartoons and drawing pictures again. On the nightstand beside her bed sat one of those drawings. Her, Caleb, and a man in a blue uniform all holding hands under a yellow sun. That image, scrawled in crayon, said more than any article ever could. It wasn't about a traffic stop. It was about what people choose to do when rules collide with reality. In this town, they didn't just see a runaway and a cop. They saw a family worth saving. And in doing so, they reminded everyone that kindness doesn't need permission. It just needs someone to act on it.